This is a little bit difficult to do, this one, because the subject matter is quite strange and the allegation which I make might seem almost wild and inappropriate. But looking more closely at the way ideology behaves and the very strange historic evidence that it almost inevitably involves a large number of people being killed, makes me think it's worthwhile exploring this a little further. Ideologies are death cults. People must be made to conform. So fear, to this end, is morally acceptable. I long wondered why governments, gripped by secular religious ideology, are so lethal to their own citizens or to those they have conquered, as if the state must be at war with them. Mid-20th century Germany, USSR, Mao's China and Pol Pot's hell in Cambodia are a few examples. Death appears to be the hallmark of ideological dictatorship. Appeal to historic oppression creates an arm's length emotional focus on the fate of the dead while generating an ambition to correct wrongs. Meanwhile, ideological abstraction distracts attention away from modern oppression that might call for flexibility of thought outside the cast-iron, know-all certainty of ideological prescription. History is useful because, however it's presented, it can't change. If ideologues want to change it, assuming they're in command of the state, no one dare question the new history. It's easier to do things this way than to try to square ideology with change, which is arguably an impossibility. The test of political systems is to define what human nature the dictators necessary to suit the utopia they plan for everyone. This nature must be universal in any purely logical political theory, because ideology demands coherence and consistency. Any possibility of accommodating more than one human nature, disagreement, contradiction or uncertainty, is anathema. An ideologue with a plan will look around and see all sorts of people who need to be knocked into shape so their nature conforms to the specification necessary to make theoretical heaven on earth a practical reality. They conclude that a vast part of the population is in dire need of rehabilitation to return them to the natural goodness they had at birth, or to wipe clean the slate and then to turn them into model citizens, each identical to the next. Where appalling examples of rogue ideological states in the 20th century saw the combined deaths of hundreds of millions, those deemed too bad to be rehabilitated or wiped clean, countless others were terrorized by the bloody hand of state fear to conform. In effect, theirs was a living death, constantly glorified by state blandishment, parades, flags and collective refrains from hale and hearty party officials resembling well-fed clerics casting dissembling blessings to victims of medieval famines. Ideological justice can't accommodate nuance and is incapable of judgment, which is a bit of an issue because judges are usually necessary. Wedded to complete consistency, tiny deviation from ideological correctness, like a single microbe in a tanker can destroy 20 tons of milk, signals an individual who does not conform. The remedy is re-education if necessary, preceded by appropriate physical punishment, or, failing that, and here's the grisly part, execution. Human nature must be imposed on people to prove that ideological theory is correct. Instead of working from how humans can develop a humane society and politics, we are hypothesized as we are not, to force us, like square pegs into round holes, into ideological hell on earth, flagged as heaven. There are as many human natures as there are human beings, but progressives fixated on self-justifying, closed-system ideology, will force people into conformity. Those who refuse inhumanity will be broken. Hundreds of millions paid the price of academics unwilling or simply monumentally incompetent to expose the ideology as the greatest enemy of reason and humanity. Death cults have existed for centuries or longer. We used to be astonished by the Day of the Dead in Central America, or the darker history of mass sacrificial murder by the Aztecs, while ignoring monuments to the dead littering churches in Britain, or close to sacrificial World War I trench charges. They are nothing new, and now we seem to be in the grip of the blind arrogance of ideological Noelism in Westminster. They are intent on the elimination of human natures in the name of forced moral conformity and correctness, creating a form of living death from the absurdity of ideology. People must be ideologically correct. If they kick up, the only option is conquest in the form of state oppression of legacy culture with the intention of complete destruction of its associated society. A small band of ideologues are launching an imperial project to colonize minds of all those who do not or will not conform to what enslaves their own thinking. People must be forced to be correct. Or, as Rousseau said, people must be forced to be free. Slavery is freedom. So contempt for contradiction leads to absurdity and, in this case, appalling inhumanity. As a note, in the social contract, Rousseau argued that a citizen who refuses to obey the collective general will must be compelled by the community to do so, which, quoting Rousseau, means nothing less than that he will be forced to be free. Well, there it is. I hadn't thought of ideology as leading people almost like a sort of hideous intellectual Pied Piper into a sort of mental chasm or cave, rendering them senseless to reason and subject to appalling inhumanity. It's really quite ghastly. There is a link between this business of forcing people to conform and in effect killing the human spirit to the actual killing of those who wouldn't conform physically, and that too killed their spirit. But in their case, in many cases, permanently. Thanks for listening. It is a difficult subject, but I think it's worth just seeing the implications of the ideological approach, which in its denial of reality is so appalling that it denies humanity. It's grotesque. And yet for some reason, academia and many others haven't really taken ideology seriously enough to look at it and see it as it really is. The paradoxes of reason, of course, which I put in the transcript at the bottom, are fundamental, and if they were taken as with due respect, ideology would implode. The political consequences are enormous. We need to be rescued before we have another dose of mass killing caused by the absolute certainty in many people's heads that they're right because they're ideologically correct, and for no other reason. It is grotesque. Do we have to learn again the lesson we should have learned in the ideological war in the late 1930s and 40s of the 20th century? I do hope we do learn pretty quickly, and certainly it would create a revolution politically and save us from the appalling possibility of another dose of in effect mass murder in the name of political theory and a sense of feeling virtuous. I can think of little more grotesque.